Every settler in Bismarck Township laughed at Sarah Vickers running her stovepipe under her bed frame. A widow can't cut 12 cords alone. Her children would freeze in that cabin. Sarah built it anyway, a gamble nobody understood with $32 and an injured shoulder. In January 1887, at 41 degrees below zero, that gamble faced its ultimate test. But let's go back to 8 months earlier, in May of 1886, where Sarah Vickers had never even split a cord of firewood in her life. The plow horse kicked Thomas Vickers in the chest on a Tuesday morning in March. He died 3 days later in their cabin bed, drowning in his own blood while Sarah held his hand and their children slept against the far wall. She buried him on the hill, overlooking their 160 acres. Then she walked back down to the cabin and took inventory of what remained. 2 children. Emma was 7. Daniel was 4. Both needed food, clothing, warmth. Both depended entirely on a mother who had never lived alone, never managed a homestead without a husband, never faced a Dakota winter as the only adult in a 16 by 20-foot cabin 14 miles from town. Sarah opened Thomas's tool chest. Inside, a hammer, 3 chisels, a handsaw, a level, 2 wrenches, a broken plane. Tools she barely knew how to hold, much less use. She walked to their wood stack behind the cabin. 4 cords of deadfall cottonwood, unsplit, stacked against the north wall where Thomas had piled it before the accident. Cottonwood burned fast and produced weak heat. Every homesteader knew it. You used cottonwood when you had nothing better. Sarah touched her left shoulder. She'd fallen from the wagon in July while helping Thomas load fence posts. The shoulder had healed wrong. After an hour of heavy work, the pain became sharp enough to stop her completely. She ran the mathematics in her head. 1 cord of wood required 3 to 4 hours of splitting for an experienced man with a strong back and functioning shoulders. Sarah had neither experience nor strength. She could work perhaps 1 hour before her shoulder failed. 8 remaining cords, 32 hours of labor minimum. That assumed perfect conditions, no mistakes, no setbacks, no time spent on the 100 other tasks required for survival. The impossibility felt physical, like a weight pressing on her chest. Emma appeared at the cabin door. "Mama, are we staying?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at the homestead claim with Thomas's name on it, at 3 years of brutal labor, breaking sod, digging the well, raising these walls log by log. "Yes," Sarah said, "we're staying." She had $32, the sum total of selling Thomas's wagon team and his better tools to Olaf Hendrickson, the Swedish farmer 3 miles east. $32 to last through winter, to purchase food, kerosene, nails, fabric, everything 2 children needed to survive 5 months of Dakota cold. In June, Sarah walked to Bismarck, 14 miles along the rutted wagon road, carrying Daniel when his legs gave out, holding Emma's hand when the girl stumbled with exhaustion. She bought half a cord of pre-split oak from the lumberyard, $12. Good oak that would burn hot and slow. She paid cash and felt the weight of her remaining funds, $20, gone in minutes. The lumberyard owner loaded it onto a borrowed cart. Sarah pulled it home herself, muscles screaming, shoulder throbbing, children walking alongside in the dust. At the Bismarck General Store, she purchased flour, salt, and cornmeal. The store owner, a thin man named Morrison, tallied her bill with careful attention. $18.30, Mrs. Vickers. Sarah paid. She had $32 when she'd entered town. Now she had $1.70. Henrik Johansson was standing at the counter when she turned to leave. Johansson owned 320 acres of successful wheat farm north of town. He was 54 years old, Norwegian-born, respected by every settler in the territory. He'd survived 9 Dakota winters. His word on frontier survival carried the weight of lived experience. He looked at Sarah's purchases. at her thin frame, at the two children waiting outside in the heat. "Mrs. Vickers," he said. His accent shaped the words carefully. "You have made preparations for winter?" "I'm working on it," Sarah said. "You need 12 cords minimum. That is $24 per cord if you buy it split. You understand the mathematics?" Sarah felt the weight of the remaining $1.70 in her pocket. "Yes." "Then you understand you cannot purchase sufficient wood." "I'll cut my own." Johansson's expression didn't change. "A woman alone cannot cut sufficient wood. I have 2 grown sons. Together we cut 16 cords each summer. You have a wounded arm and 2 babies." The store fell quiet. Morrison stopped counting coins. 2 other customers turned to watch. "I'll find a way," Sarah said. Johansson shook his head slowly. "To cut your own wood, you need tools. A cross-cut saw costs $4. A splitting maul costs $2. Wedges cost $1. Sharpening files cost 75 cents. Even with tools, the labor is impossible for you." He wasn't being cruel. Sarah understood that. He was stating facts the way a doctor states a diagnosis. "You must remarry before September," Johansson said, "or leave before October. Those are your only choices. The winter does not negotiate." Sarah walked out of the store. Emma and Daniel fell into step beside her. The wagon road stretched 14 miles back to their cabin. "Mama," Emma said quietly, "will we be warm this winter like when Papa was here?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't lie to her daughter, and she couldn't speak the truth aloud. That night, after the children slept, Sarah sat at the cabin table and calculated survival. Wood needed, 12 cords minimum for a conventional cast iron stove burning November through March. Wood available, 4 cords of inferior cottonwood, unsplit. Effective deficit, 11 cords. Cost to purchase split wood, $264. Cash remaining, $1.70. Cost of tools to cut her own wood, $7.75. Money she didn't have. Tools that wouldn't matter because her shoulder couldn't sustain the labor. Physical capacity, 1 hour of heavy work daily before the pain became disabling. Time remaining until first frost, 126 days. Early September was typical for the first killing cold. Every calculation ended the same way. Failure, death, loss of everything. Sarah put her head in her hands. The weight of impossibility crushed her. The next morning, she tried anyway. Behind the cabin, she selected the smallest log from the cottonwood pile, perhaps 10 inches in diameter, 3 feet long. She positioned it on end on a flat stump Thomas had used as a chopping block. She lifted the axe. The handle felt foreign in her hands. Thomas had always split the wood. Sarah had cooked, gardened, sewed. Division of labor on the frontier wasn't negotiable. Everyone did what they could do best. She swung the axe. The blade glanced off the wood and buried itself in the stump. The impact jarred her shoulder. Pain shot down her arm. She pulled the axe free, positioned herself again, swung harder. This time the blade bit into the log, but only an inch. The wood didn't split. She swung again, and again, and again. After 10 swings, her shoulder screamed. After 20, her hands blistered. After 30, the log finally split with a crack that sounded like victory. Sarah looked at the 2 pieces of wood, then at the pile of unsplit logs behind the cabin. Hundreds of pieces, thousands of swings required. She checked Thomas's pocket watch, the one she'd kept. 40 minutes had passed. 1 log. 40 minutes, her shoulder already failing. The mathematics were devastating. July arrived with unusual cold. Sarah woke one morning to find frost on the cabin window pane. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees overnight. The stove had burned out during the night. She'd banked it poorly. Still learning the rhythm of fire management Thomas had known instinctively, Daniel and Emma shivered in their bed against the wall, blankets pulled tight. Sarah crossed the cabin to check the stove. The cast iron was cold to touch, but the floor directly in front of it, where the stove's legs rested, still held warmth. She knelt and pressed her palm to the floorboards. Warm, not hot, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding wood. Heat radiated down into the floor, stored there even after the fire died. Sarah stood and touched the stovepipe where it exited through the cabin wall. The metal was warm 12 inches beyond the stove itself. The smoke carried heat the entire length before exhausting outside into nothing. She built the morning fire and made breakfast. But her mind kept returning to that warm floor, to that warm pipe, heat going down when it should go up, heat traveling through metal before escaping into air. Heat wasted because conventional wisdom said stovepipes must exit immediately, must rise straight up, must get the smoke out fast. What if conventional wisdom was wrong? The idea arrived fully formed, like something she'd always known but never articulated. What if the pipe traveled longer before exiting? What if it traveled horizontally across the cabin floor? What if it ran directly beneath the bed where the children slept? The pipe would become a radiator, metal conducting heat along its entire length, warming the sleeping area from below. Heat rising through the bed slats into mattresses and blankets. A lower temperature fire, slower burn, less wood consumed. The sleeping area, the critical zone where children spent 12 hours nightly, would stay warm even as the fire died overnight. Sarah walked outside and found Thomas's old forge equipment in the barn. He'd been a blacksmith before claiming this homestead. The forge was cold now, unused since they had arrived 3 years ago, but the materials remained. 6 sections of 6-inch stovepipe, each section 3 feet long, 18 feet total. Enough to run from the west wall to the east wall if she positioned it correctly. She touched the pipe. Rust coated the exterior. Years of weather exposure, but the metal underneath remained sound. Free. The pipe cost her nothing. She would need sheet metal for custom bends, 1 elbow to transition from vertical to horizontal at the stove, another elbow to transition back to vertical at the wall exit. She would need wire to secure the pipe to a framework beneath the bed. She would need clay mud to seal the joints against smoke leakage. She would need wooden blocks to raise the bed frame 8 inches off the floor, creating clearance for the pipe to pass beneath. The materials cost tallied in her mind. $1.50 for sheet metal from the tinsmith in Bismarck. Everything else could be scavenged or made. Total investment, $1.50. Compared to $264 for purchased firewood, or $7.75 for tools she couldn't effectively use. The logic felt sound. Heat transfer through metal was simple physics. Horizontal routing captured escaping warmth instead of exhausting it. Targeted heating warmed the critical sleeping area without wasting fuel on empty air. Wood consumption would drop, maybe by half, maybe more. 4 cords might become sufficient, 5 at most. But Sarah had never worked with metal, never modified a stove installation, never tested unconventional designs against winter that killed without mercy. If the system failed, if the draft didn't work, if smoke leaked into the cabin, if the pipe cooled before transferring heat, she would have no time and no resources to implement a conventional solution. Her children would freeze. Sarah pulled Margaret Brennan's sleeve during the July garden harvest. Margaret lived 3 miles east with her husband Patrick and their 5 children. She'd survived 4 Dakota winters. She knew frontier survival the way Henrik Johansson knew it, through experience earned in cold that killed the unprepared. "I want to show you something," Sarah said. They sat in the shade of Sarah's cabin while Emma and Margaret's youngest daughter played nearby. Sarah explained the horizontal pipe concept. the heat capture principle, the projected wood savings. Margaret listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. The heat needs to rise, Sarah. That's God's design. Smoke goes up. You're fighting nature itself. But the pipe would have a rise, Sarah said. 1 inch every 4 feet, enough for draft. The draft won't work horizontal. The smoke will pour back into your cabin. Thomas's forge had horizontal sections in the flue. It worked. That pipe will cool before the heat reaches your bed. You'll get smoke and cold metal, nothing more. Sarah felt her certainty wavering. Margaret's objections were technical, grounded in physics and experience. Even if it works for one night, Margaret continued, creosote will clog that pipe in a week. You'll burn your cabin down. I've seen chimney fires, Sarah. The pipe glows red. Everything within 10 feet ignites. I would clean it, Sarah said. How? You cannot reach a horizontal pipe to clean it. No one has ever done this before because it cannot be done safely. Margaret took Sarah's hand. Her grip was firm, her expression kind but firm. I understand desperation, but innovation born from panic is just a fancy name for suicide. Cut what wood you can. Come stay with us when the cold arrives. We have room. Sarah pulled her hand back gently. I can't leave the homestead. If I abandon the claim, I lose everything. Better to lose property than children. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness and listened to Emma and Daniel breathing. Thought about Margaret's objections, about Henrik Johansson's dismissal, about the brutal mathematics that made conventional preparation impossible. 12 cords required, 4 cords available, no money, no strength, no time. Conventional methods meant certain failure. An unconventional method meant possible failure, but possible was better than certain. Sarah made her decision. She would build the horizontal flue system. She would gamble her children's lives on physics and desperation, and if she was wrong, at least she would die trying something instead of watching the inevitable unfold. In mid-August, Sarah walked to Sunday service at the Bismarck Lutheran Church. She wore her only good dress, faded but clean. Emma and Daniel walked beside her, scrubbed and combed. After the service, families gathered in the churchyard. Conversations flowed around garden yields and cattle prices and the coming harvest. Luther Carver approached while Sarah spoke with Margaret Brennan. Carver was 42, a land speculator who owned parcels throughout the territory. He wore a suit despite the heat. His boots were polished. He smiled with teeth that seemed too white. Mrs. Vickers, he said. His voice carried across the churchyard. Other conversations stopped. People turned to watch. Mr. Carver, Sarah replied. I've heard concerning reports. You're modifying your cabin's heating apparatus. I'm making improvements, Sarah said carefully. Improvements. Carver's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've been told you're running pipe through your floor, some kind of unconventional design. A horizontal flue beneath the bed frame to capture heat that would otherwise escape. Several women exchanged glances. Henrik Johansson stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently. I've built 14 cabins in this territory, Mrs. Vickers. Heat rises, smoke rises. Your contraption violates basic principles. You're endangering your children. The design is sound, Sarah said. Her voice remained steady, though her heart hammered. Sound? Carver's tone sharpened. Or desperate. There's a difference between innovation and recklessness. He paused, let the crowd absorb his words. Then his voice softened with false sympathy. I'll purchase your claim today. $75 cash, enough to rent a room in town through winter, Enough for passage back to Pennsylvania come spring. Your children deserve safety, Mrs. Vickers, not a mother's pride. The offer hung in the air. $75. More money than Sarah had seen in months. But she knew the calculation. Her homestead was worth $200 minimum. The cabin alone cost $150 in labor and materials. The well, the fencing, the cleared fields, 3 years of work that couldn't be measured in currency. Carver would buy it for $75, then sell it for triple that to the next desperate settler. No, Sarah said. Then I'll see you at the county land office in March, filing abandonment. Those children deserve a mother with sense, not pride. He walked away. The crowd remained silent. Several families nodded agreement with Carver's assessment. 2 women approached Sarah and offered quietly to take Emma and Daniel until Sarah came to her senses. Margaret Brennan stood torn between loyalty and honesty. Henrik Johansson said nothing, just watched with the patient expression of a man who'd seen winter kill the unprepared too many times to argue with the doomed. Sarah walked home with her children. 14 miles in the August heat. Emma asked no questions. Daniel held her hand without speaking. They understood, in the way children understand adult catastrophe, that something had broken in that churchyard. That night, Sarah sat at the cabin table with the homestead deed, Thomas's signature at the bottom, his handwriting neat despite the calluses that had made holding a pen difficult. She calculated what abandoning meant: loss of $125 in equity, loss of 3 years' labor, loss of the one thing she and Thomas had built together. She calculated what staying meant: social isolation, economic pressure, the certainty that if she failed, the community would say they'd warned her. And she calculated what 2 children freezing to death meant. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Let them watch, Sarah said aloud to the empty cabin. Let them judge. Let them see if a desperate woman with nothing left to lose can prove Henrik Johansson wrong. On August 21st, Sarah began construction. The bed frame required modification first. She positioned wooden blocks at each corner, 8 inches high, cut from deadfall timber. The bed rose like an altar. Beneath it, open space where pipe would travel. She built a support framework using scrap lumber Thomas had saved. The framework would hold the pipe stable, prevent sagging, maintain the critical 1-inch rise per 4 feet of horizontal run. Her carpentry was crude. Thomas had possessed the skill. Sarah possessed only determination and Thomas's basic tools. The joints didn't fit cleanly. The framework wobbled until she added cross-bracing. 22 hours of labor over 3 days. Her hands blistered within the first hour. By day 3, the blisters had broken and bled. On August 24th, she smashed her left thumb with the hammer. The thumbnail turned black over the following week. Eventually it fell off completely, leaving raw flesh that made every task painful. Next came the pipe preparation. Sarah dragged the 6 sections from the barn to the cabin. Each section was 3 feet long, 6 inches in diameter, coated in rust and old soot. She cleaned them with rags and water. Rust flaked off in orange sheets. Soot blackened her hands. She breathed the dust and coughed for 3 days. On August 27th, she discovered a 2-inch crack in one section. Weather damage. The metal had split along a seam. She patched it with sheet metal and wire binding. The patch was ugly but functional. It would hold. It had to hold. 31 hours of labor over 5 days. Rust cuts covered her hands. 3 cuts showed signs of infection, red, swollen, painful to touch. The custom bends came next. This was metalwork Sarah had never attempted. She needed a 90-degree elbow where the pipe exited the stove, vertical to horizontal. The transition had to be smooth or the draft would fail. She tried bending the sheet metal cold. The metal cracked. She built a small fire in the yard, heated the metal until it glowed. Watched Thomas do this years ago, back when he had worked the forge. She'd brought him water and food while he worked, watched without really understanding what she was seeing. Now she had to understand. The hot metal bent, but Sarah's grip slipped. The metal seared her left forearm, a 3-inch diameter brand, second-degree burn. The flesh blistered immediately. She plunged her arm in the water bucket. Pain drove her to her knees. Emma found her there. "Mama!" "I'm fine," Sarah lied. "Get the lard from the cabin." They dressed the burn with lard and cloth. Would scar. Sarah knew that immediately, but infection was the real threat. She kept it clean, changed the dressing twice daily, watched for the red streaks that meant blood poisoning. The elbow joint eventually took shape, crude but functional. Sarah created a second elbow for the wall exit. 28 hours of labor over 4 days. 75 cents of sheet metal wasted in failed attempts. On September 5th, she began installation. The stove positioned at the west wall. The pipe threading beneath the bed frame through the support channel she'd built. Wire loops every 18 inches to secure the pipe. The careful rise, 1 inch per 4 feet, maintained using string and level. She cut the exit hole in the east wall. Cut it wrong the first time. Had to patch the mistake with scrap wood and clay, then cut again. The vertical exit pipe installed last. Clay mud mixed with straw sealed every joint. The mud had to dry completely or smoke would leak. 26 hours over 3 days. Her back ached from crawling beneath the bed. Her shoulder burned constantly now, pain that didn't stop even when she rested. On September 8th, a thunderstorm flooded the cabin yard. The clay mud she'd prepared turned to soup. She lost 6 hours waiting for it to dry enough to use. On September 11th, Emma fell sick with fever. 2 days of fever while Sarah split her attention between a sick child and a half-finished pipe system. The construction timeline slipped further. On September 14th, a pipe section rolled off the bed frame during installation. The fall dented the metal. 4 hours of work reshaping it with the hammer. Progress felt glacial. Weather signals mounted. On August 25th, the first cool night arrived, 44 degrees with frost on the grass at dawn. On September 3rd, geese flew south overhead. On September 8th, the temperature dropped to 38 degrees overnight and garden vegetables showed cold stress. On September 12th, true frost arrived. Half the remaining garden died overnight. Sarah's physical condition deteriorated. She'd lost approximately 12 pounds. Her face looked hollowed, dark circles under her eyes, hands that trembled from exhaustion. She skipped meals to feed the children, worked past midnight most nights, rose at dawn. Daniel asked, "Mama, why are you so tired?" Emma asked, "Mama, if you die, what happens to us?" Sarah had no good answers. On September 17th, Olaf Hendrickson arrived unannounced. His wagon carried half a cord of split oak. Good oak, worth $12. "Your Thomas once helped me raise my barn," Olaf said. "A man pays his debts, living or dead." Sarah's pride burned. "I cannot accept charity, Olaf." "It's not charity, it's contract payment. You'll sew winter shirts for my boys. My wife died last spring. I cannot sew." Sarah understood immediately. Olaf knew she had no time for sewing, knew she'd never collect payment, but he'd framed it as trade to preserve her dignity. She accepted with a throat too tight for proper thanks. Wood supply updated, 4.5 cords, still dangerously short, but better. On September 16th, Sarah built the first test fire. She loaded the stove with kindling, lit it, watched smoke rise up the vertical section, then travel horizontal beneath the bed. For 10 terrible seconds, smoke poured back into the cabin. The draft wasn't working. Margaret Brennan had been right. Physics had defeated desperation, but Sarah adjusted. Raised the bed frame another 2 inches at the east end. Increased the pipe slope slightly. She lit the fire again. This time the smoke exhausted properly. The draft worked, smoke traveling horizontal, then rising through the vertical exit. Within 30 minutes, the pipe radiated detectable heat along its entire length, 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The bed slats warmed noticeably. It worked. Sarah sat on the cabin floor and cried. 27 days of construction, 118 hours of labor, $1.50 in materials, multiple injuries, social condemnation, physical exhaustion that left her hollow. But it worked. September 24th, 10 days until the first typical killing frost. The horizontal flue system was complete, tested once, operational. Sarah looked at her children sleeping in the bed, at the pipe beneath them that would keep them warm, at the wood stack that might possibly be sufficient. She'd gambled everything on physics and desperation. The real test would come in January. But tonight, for the first time since Thomas died, Sarah allowed herself to believe survival might be possible. The system worked in September. It worked in October. Sarah maintained a low fire through the cool autumn nights. The pipe radiated heat beneath the bed. Emma and Daniel slept without extra blankets. Wood consumption, approximately 3/10 of a cord over the first 6 days. Sarah calculated the projection, 1.5 cords per month. If that held through winter, 4.5 cords might be sufficient. Might. By mid-October, temperatures dropped into the teens overnight. Sarah increased the fire slightly, still below conventional burn rate, still within the efficiency range she'd calculated. The pipe surface remained 160 to 190 degrees along its full length. The bed platform stayed warm even 6 hours after the fire died. The children's health held, no illness despite the cold. They slept soundly, warm in the zone the horizontal flue created. Sarah allowed herself cautious hope. On October 12th, she encountered Henrik Johansson at the Bismarck General Store. He observed her purchasing minimal supplies: flour, salt, a single pound of cornmeal, the careful shopping of someone counting every penny. "I see your strange pipe is smoking," Johansson said. "It works," Sarah replied. "September is not January, Mrs. Vickers." Sarah met his eyes. "I understand that. Wait until the temperature falls below 0. Wait until the wind comes from the north for 3 days without stopping. Your little invention will fail when it matters most." He gestured toward the window. Through it, Sarah's wood stack was visible behind her wagon. "I count maybe 5 cords in your stack. I have 17. When yours runs out in January, you'll understand why experience matters." He wasn't being cruel. He was stating what he believed to be fact. Sarah recognized the difference. "We'll see," she said quietly. On October 18th, Margaret Brennan visited Sarah's cabin. She brought bread and dried apples, charity disguised as neighborliness. Margaret felt the warm bed platform, pressed her palm to the wood slats. Her expression showed surprise. "It works now, Sarah, but creosote is building in that pipe. You cannot see it yet, but it's there. When the real cold comes and you push that fire harder, you'll have a chimney fire. Those pipes will glow red and ignite your bed." "I'll clean it," Sarah said. "How? You cannot reach a horizontal pipe to clean it." "I don't know. No one has ever done this before. That's the problem with innovation. You discover the failures only after it's too late." Margaret's concern was genuine. Sarah understood that. But understanding didn't change the mathematics. Conventional preparation had been impossible. Innovation was the only path. Clean it weekly, Margaret advised. Maybe twice weekly once November arrives. Sarah nodded, though she had no idea how to clean 18 feet of horizontal pipe. On October 20th, Luther Carver spoke at the township meeting. How long until the county investigates this fire hazard? His question carried across the room. A woman's desperation has created a danger to the entire township. When her cabin burns, the prairie fire could take neighboring homesteads. He proposed a county inspection. If Sarah's system failed safety standards, she should be ordered to dismantle it. His underlying motive remained transparent. He wanted her claim, wanted the improved land at tax sale prices. Every week she survived reduced his opportunity. Henrik Johansson remained silent during Carver's speech, but his silence felt different now, less certain than before. Weather patterns shifted in mid-October. On October 16th, snow flurries fell. They melted immediately, but signaled winter's approach. On October 21st, the night temperature dropped to 12 degrees. The daytime high reached only 31 degrees. On October 24th, 3 inches of snow fell and remained on the ground. On October 27th, the temperature hit 8 degrees overnight. Wind chill made it feel below zero. Old-timers at the general store discussed the farmer's almanac predictions. Harsh winter for northern plains. Extended cold periods expected. Winter's coming early this year, one farmer said. Feel it in the air. Henrik Johansson's warning about northern wind patterns proved prescient. The wind shifted, blew steady from the north, brought cold that felt sharp as broken glass. By November 1st, Sarah's wood consumption rate had climbed to 1.4 cords per month, still far below conventional requirements. Her system maintained the sleeping area at 58 to 62 degrees, even when the ambient cabin temperature dropped to 35 degrees. Wood supply status, 3.2 cords remaining. She'd consumed 1.3 cords over 5 weeks. At current rates, she might make it through winter. Might. The children played normally. Emma no longer seemed afraid. Daniel laughed again, the sound Sarah had missed without realizing it. Maybe we'll survive this winter after all, Sarah said aloud to the empty cabin. On November 3rd, she woke to unusual silence. The wind had stopped completely. The birds weren't calling. The quality of air felt wrong. Sarah opened the cabin door. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees overnight. The sky showed a strange yellow-gray color. Thick clouds hung low and heavy. Wind from the north. Sharp, steady, cutting. Sarah had lived 3 years in Dakota Territory. She recognized blizzard weather. She closed the door and began preparing. January 10th, 1887. Dawn temperature, 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah checked the barometer Thomas had mounted on the cabin wall. The needle pointed lower than she'd ever seen it, dropping fast, wind from the northwest, sustained at 25 miles per hour. The cabin walls creaked, sky overcast, heavy, low enough to touch. Sarah dressed Emma and Daniel in every layer they owned, sent them to help bring firewood from the outdoor stack. Wood supply status, 1.8 cords remaining. They worked in shifts. Sarah carried armloads. Emma carried what she could manage. Daniel dragged smaller pieces. The wind fought them for every trip. By afternoon, the temperature had fallen to -8 degrees. Snow began, light at first, then heavy, wet flakes that stung exposed skin. Wind increased, gusts to 35 miles per hour. Visibility dropped. Sarah couldn't see the barn from the cabin door. 40 feet of distance erased by white. She brought the last armload inside, stacked it against the walls. The cabin looked like a lumber yard. Wood piled everywhere except the narrow paths they needed for movement. 1.8 cords. Perhaps enough for 5 days of extreme cold. Perhaps not. Sarah closed the door, sealed the gaps with rags, built the fire, and prepared to wait. January 11th, temperature minus 18 degrees. The blizzard arrived with full force. Wind howled at 30 to 40 miles per hour sustained. Gusts rattled the cabin walls. Snow fell so thick Sarah couldn't see 5 feet beyond the windows. She maintained the fire, fed it carefully, monitored the wood supply with the attention of someone counting heartbeats. The horizontal flue performed exactly as designed. The pipe radiated heat beneath the bed. The sleeping area stayed warm while the rest of the cabin hovered at 40 degrees. Emma and Daniel played quietly, built structures with wooden blocks, drew pictures in the frost on the windows. Sarah watched the woodpile shrink, calculated hours remaining, prayed the blizzard would break before the fuel ran out. January 12th, temperature minus 29 degrees. Emma woke with fever. Sarah felt her daughter's forehead. Hot. Too hot. The kind of heat that meant serious illness. "My chest hurts, Mama," Emma said. Her voice sounded weak. Sarah listened to Emma's breathing, shallow, labored, a rattling sound with each inhale. Pneumonia. Sarah recognized it immediately. Thomas's mother had died from pneumonia 3 winters ago. Sarah remembered the sound, the fever, the way breathing became work instead of reflex. The nearest doctor was 14 miles away in Bismarck. Impossible to reach in a blizzard. Impossible to reach in minus 29-degree cold even without the storm. Conventional treatment, warmth, fluids, rest, prayer. Survival rate for frontier children with pneumonia, approximately 60% with good care. Critical factor, the patient must stay warm. Cold exacerbated respiratory failure. Cold turned pneumonia from treatable to fatal. Sarah looked at her wood supply. 1.5 cords remaining. Emma needed maximum warmth. The blizzard demanded maximum fuel consumption. At rates needed to keep Emma alive, the wood would last perhaps 36 hours. If the blizzard continued longer than that, Sarah would face the choice: watch Emma freeze or burn through all fuel and have all 3 of them freeze. The mathematics were brutal. Sarah moved Emma's mattress to the floor directly above the warmest section of the horizontal flue, positioned her where heat rose most intensely through the bed slats. Daniel slept on the bed platform above. Emma slept on the mattress below. The warmest possible configuration. Emma's breathing grew more labored through the afternoon. Fever spiked. Sarah estimated 103 degrees based on the heat radiating from her daughter's skin. She boiled water on the stove. Let steam fill the cabin. Steam helped breathing, made the work of pulling air into damaged lungs slightly easier. Water supply depleted quickly. Sarah looked at the water bucket. Perhaps 2 gallons remained. The well was 60 feet from the cabin door. In normal weather, an easy walk. In blizzard conditions with minus 29-degree temperature and 40-mile-per-hour wind, the journey was potentially lethal. But Emma needed water for steam, for drinking, for the fever that dehydrated her body. January 13th, 2 in the morning. Temperature outside, minus 41 degrees. Emma's breathing produced phlegm. She coughed. The sound rattled wetly. Semi-conscious, delirious with fever. Sarah added wood to the fire, watched the pile shrink. Wood remaining, approximately 1.3 cords. At current burn rate, 36 to 40 hours maximum. The blizzard showed no signs of stopping. By 8 in the morning, the water was gone. Sarah looked at Emma, at her daughter's flushed face, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She looked at Daniel, silent and terrified, clutching his wooden toy horse. She looked at the empty water bucket. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Sarah found Thomas's rope in the corner. Good hemp rope, 65 feet long. She tied one end around her waist, anchored the other end to the door handle. Frontier blizzard survival technique. The rope would guide her back if she became disoriented. Without it, she could wander in circles 5 feet from the cabin and freeze before finding the door. She wrapped her face with cloth, left only her eyes exposed, pulled on Thomas's heavy coat, his gloves, his hat. Temperature, minus 39 degrees. Wind chill, minus 65. "Mama, don't go," Daniel said. "I'll be right back," Sarah lied. She forced the door open against the wind. Snow blasted into the cabin. She stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind her. Visibility, 0. Complete white. The wind knocked her sideways. She couldn't see the well, couldn't see the barn, couldn't see her own feet. The rope was her only connection to survival. Sarah walked forward. The wind hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled, went to one knee. Ice formed instantly on the cloth covering her face. Each breath pulled frozen air into her lungs. She couldn't feel her hands, couldn't feel her feet. The cold penetrated every layer. 60 feet to the well. In normal conditions, 30 seconds. In these conditions, it felt like miles. She walked, counted steps, lost count. The rope paid out behind her, her only lifeline. Something dark appeared in the white. The well. Sarah reached for the bucket. The pulleys were frozen solid. She hammered at the ice with numb hands. The ice shattered. She lowered the bucket. The rope around her waist tugged. The wind was trying to pull her away from the well, away from the cabin, away from everything. She pulled the bucket up. Water sloshed over the rim, froze instantly on her gloves. The return journey was worse. The wind now hit her face directly. The bucket's weight unbalanced her. She fell twice. The rope kept her oriented but didn't prevent the falls. Her left ear went numb, then painful, then numb again. Frostbite. She recognized the progression. 3 fingers on her right hand showed the same pattern. White, then agonizing pain, then nothing. She couldn't tell if she was crying. The tears froze before they could fall. The cabin door appeared suddenly. Sarah grabbed the handle, pulled. The door wouldn't open. Ice had formed in the jamb. She pulled harder, put her full weight against it. The door opened. She fell inside with the water bucket. Time exposed, 18 minutes. Daniel slammed the door shut, helped Sarah to the stove. The pain began as circulation returned, excruciating. Her fingers screamed. Her ear felt like it was being cut off with a dull blade. Sarah plunged her hands in lukewarm water. The pain intensified. She bit down on cloth to keep from screaming and frightening the children. The frost-bitten fingers would recover. She learned that later. But her left ear suffered permanent tissue damage. The flesh would remain discolored for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder. She boiled water for Emma, made steam, forced fluids between her daughter's lips. Emma alternated between fever delirium and disturbing lucidity. In lucid moments, she asked, "Am I dying?" Sarah said no, but she didn't know if it was truth or comfort. Daniel sat silent, traumatized, clutching his toy horse. He hadn't spoken since Sarah returned from the well. Wood supply, under 1 cord remaining. Sarah calculated. 24 hours of fuel. Maximum. The blizzard continued into its 3rd day. By 8 in the evening on January 13th, Emma's crisis reached its peak. The fever seemed to break slightly, or she was fading toward death. Sarah couldn't tell which. The cabin ambient temperature had dropped to 38 degrees despite the fire. But the bed platform, directly above the horizontal flue, maintained 61 to 63 degrees. Emma lay in that warm zone, breathing, barely. Sarah made a calculation. If she had a conventional stove with vertical exhaust, she would need twice the fire intensity to keep the cabin at 38 degrees. That higher intensity would have consumed her wood supply 2 days ago. With conventional heating, Emma would already be dead from cold. The horizontal flue's efficiency had bought exactly enough margin to keep her daughter alive this long. But the wood was nearly gone. January 14th, late afternoon. The wind decreased, still blowing at 15 miles per hour, but the sustained fury had broken. Snow stopped falling. Temperature rose to minus 28 degrees. Sarah looked out the window. Visibility improved. She could see shapes now. The barn, the wood stack, the wood, smoke from neighboring homesteads rising into the gray sky, except one direction, southwest, where Anders Holmgren's cabin stood 2 miles away. No smoke. Sarah stared at that absent smoke column, felt dread settle in her chest. January 15th, morning, temperature minus 16 degrees, sky clearing. Emma's fever had broken overnight. She woke sweating, lucid, weak but alive. "Mama, I'm thirsty," she said. Sarah nearly wept with relief. Daniel spoke for the first time in 2 days. "Is Emma gonna live?" "Yes," Sarah said. This time she meant it. Wood remaining, approximately 0.4 cords. Enough for perhaps 3 or 4 more days of severe cold. If temperatures moderated, perhaps longer. The blizzard had lasted 5 days, 96 consecutive hours of life-threatening conditions. Sarah had survived. Her children had survived. By late morning, Henrik Johansson and 3 other men arrived on horseback. They were checking on isolated homesteads, coordinating community response to the storm. They stopped at Sarah's cabin first. Johansson dismounted, knocked. Sarah opened the door. "Mrs. Vickers, you survived." "We did," Sarah said. Johansson looked past her, saw Emma recovering in bed, saw Daniel playing with his wooden horse, saw the nearly depleted woodpile. "How much fuel do you have remaining?" "About 4/10 of a cord." Johansson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You understand that's catastrophically insufficient by conventional standards." "Yes." "Yet you and your children are alive and warm." Sarah stepped aside. "Would you like to see the system?" Johansson entered, examined the horizontal flue rotating under the bed, touched the bed platform, felt the retained warmth. He calculated aloud. "You have perhaps 2 days of fuel remaining, yet your daughter survived pneumonia in the worst cold snap in 14 years. The other men crowded in, stared at the pipe installation. One whistled low. "We need to check on Holmgren," Johansson said. His voice had gone flat. "No smoke from his cabin." They rode southwest. Sarah watched them go. An hour later they returned. Johansson dismounted again. His face was gray. "Anders Holmgren is dead, frozen in his bed, ran out of firewood on January 13th. Sarah felt the words like a physical blow. How much wood did he have? 11 cords at the start of winter. His conventional stove consumed it all. He died during the peak cold. Johansson looked at Sarah's cabin, at the thin smoke rising from her chimney, at the horizontal flue system that had kept her family alive with a fraction of Holmgren's resources. He removed his hat, a gesture of respect Sarah had never seen him make. "Mrs. Vickers, I told you last summer that a woman alone could not survive our winter. I told you that your contraption would fail when tested." He paused. "I was wrong on both counts." Sarah said nothing. Let him continue. "How much wood did you consume during the blizzard?" "Approximately 6/10 of a cord over 5 days. Johansson's calculation was immediate. "My family consumed nearly 2 cords in the same period. You used 1/3 the fuel and maintained comparable warmth." He turned to the other men. She's achieved something I would have said was impossible. One of the men asked, How does it work? Johansson looked at Sarah. Mrs. Vickers, would you explain your system? Sarah explained. The horizontal routing, the heat capture principle, the targeted warming of the sleeping area, the fuel efficiency through slower burns. The men listened, asked technical questions. Sarah answered each one. Finally, Johansson spoke again. I have survived 9 Dakota winters using methods proven by generations. You survived your first winter using a method you invented from desperation. Your approach is superior. He met Sarah's eyes. I ask your permission to examine your system closely. I would like to implement it in my own home. The moment carried weight Sarah hadn't expected. The authority figure conceding authority. The experienced elder asking to learn from the desperate widow. You're welcome to examine it, Henrik. Take measurements. I'll explain whatever you'd like to know. Johansson and the others spent 2 hours in Sarah's cabin, measuring pipe runs, checking angles, examining joints, taking notes. Before they left, Johansson said, You'll need more wood to finish the winter. I'll send a cord tomorrow. I can't. It's not charity, it's insurance. If you freeze, the county loses a homestead claim. That's bad for all of us. He smiled slightly. The first time Sarah had seen him smile. Besides, Mrs. Vickers, I suspect you'll be teaching this method to half the territory by spring. Consider it payment in advance. The next day, Margaret Brennan arrived with food and medical supplies for Emma. She looked at the horizontal flue system, touched the warm bed platform. Her expression showed something between admiration and disbelief. I told you the draft wouldn't work. I told you creosote would burn your cabin down. I told you it was suicide. Margaret took Sarah's hands. Sarah, teach me how you built this. Over the following week, visitors arrived steadily. Margaret brought her husband Patrick. He took detailed measurements, sketched the design, asked about materials and construction time. Olaf Hendrickson brought his 3 sons to study the installation. They spent 6 hours examining every joint, angle, and measurement. The Svensson family arrived from 2 miles north, Swedish immigrants with 5 children. They asked about wood consumption rates and fire management. The O'Brien family came, Irish immigrants whose children played with Emma. They wanted to know about safety and maintenance. 2 bachelor farmers from claims east of town. They asked practical questions about tools and cost. Everyone wanted to know, how much did materials cost? How long did construction take? How do you prevent smoke leak back? What's the minimum pipe rise for adequate draft? Sarah answered every question, provided measurements without hesitation, offered to examine neighbors' cabins and suggest optimal routing. She charged nothing, requested no compensation. When Henrik Johansson asked why she shared so freely, Sarah said, if Anders Holmgren had known this method, he would be alive. If one more family survives because of what I learned, then my struggle had purpose beyond my own survival. The data emerged through community discussions. Sarah's system, 3.5 cords consumed November through January. Projected full winter consumption, 4.8 to 5.2 cords. Materials cost, $1.50. Labor time, 27 days spread over 5 weeks. Survival result, 1 adult, 2 children, including pneumonia crisis. Conventional systems, average 9.2 cords consumed same period. Projected full winter, 12 to 15 cords. Cost if purchased, $264 to $330. Casualties, 1. Several near misses. Efficiency calculation. Sarah's system was 62 to 66% more fuel efficient for sleeping area heating. The cost savings exceeded $250 for settlers who purchased wood. The labor savings exceeded 40% for settlers cutting their own wood. By late January, families began implementing their own versions. Olaf Hendrickson started installation on January 28th, completed it February 4th. The Svensson family finished theirs February 10th. Bachelor farmer James Morrison installed a simplified version February 15th. Spring brought more adopters. The Brennan family installed a sophisticated multi-room version with T-junction splitting heat to 2 bedrooms. The O'Brien family completed their system March 20th. 4 additional families by May. Modifications appeared. Some families added second horizontal runs under children's beds. Morrison simplified the design with a single straight pipe run. Patrick Brennan's T-junction design became the template for larger cabins. Sarah welcomed all visitors, answered all questions, helped Margaret Brennan plan her 2-bedroom design, helped Olaf's sons troubleshoot a draft problem. She asked for nothing in return. Luther Carver did not visit Sarah's cabin. At the February township meeting, he dismissed the innovation. Desperation occasionally produces lucky outcomes. This proves nothing. When other settlers praised Sarah's ingenuity, Carver responded, "Wait until her cabin burns from a chimney fire. Innovation and recklessness are neighbors." His underlying motivation remained unchanged. He'd lost his land speculation opportunity. Sarah's success meant his failure. "One winter's survival doesn't prove a method," Carver said. "Let's see if she lasts 3 years." Henrik Johansson stood. His voice carried across the meeting hall. "Carver, your predictions have been wrong at every turn. You said she'd freeze. She survived. You said her system would fail. It succeeded. You said she endangered the township. She saved lives. Perhaps silence would serve you better than continued error." Several men nodded agreement. Carver's face flushed. He said nothing more. By May of 1887, 14 families in the Bismarck Township area had implemented horizontal flue heating systems. Sarah's cabin became an informal teaching site. She hosted visitors most weekends through spring. Patrick Brennan created written instructions with measurements, distributed copies at the general store. One family traveled 30 miles from the south specifically to examine Sarah's installation. The Bismarck General Store began stocking 6-inch stovepipe in greater quantities. Demand had increased. Several families wrote letters to relatives in other territories describing the system. Sarah provided consultation freely, never charged, helped families troubleshoot installation problems, focused particularly on fire safety, proper draft, adequate clearances, joint sealing. "The method saved my children," she told Margaret Brennan. "I have no ownership of knowledge that preserves life." Sarah continued operating the homestead successfully. In 1889, she proved up her claim. 5 years residence required. She received the deed. In autumn of 1890, she remarried. John Pritchard, a widower farmer from a neighboring claim. He had young children. She had Emma and Daniel. They combined homesteads, eventually expanded to 320 acres with modest prosperity. Emma and Daniel both survived to adulthood. Emma became a teacher. Daniel continued farming. Sarah Pritchard died in March of 1919, age 64. Influenza during the post-war epidemic. She was buried in Bismarck Township Cemetery. Her grandchildren told stories of grandmother's clever stovepipe for decades afterward. January 1887, 41 degrees below zero. 5 consecutive nights of killing cold. Henrik Johansson had told her, "You'll freeze solid in your bed come January. That contraption won't keep a cat warm." But Sarah Vickers didn't freeze. She burned 6/10 of a cord of firewood, while her neighbor with 11 cords froze to death. She kept her pneumonia-stricken daughter alive in a cabin that should have been a tomb. She proved that desperation, when married to careful thought, can produce something conventional wisdom never imagines. The horizontal flue beneath her bed radiated heat upward through the long Dakota night. The innovation cost her $1.50 and 27 days of labor. It saved her children's lives and changed how 14 families survived the following winter. Sarah's frostbitten ear, the one damaged during her blizzard trip to the well, never fully recovered. For the rest of her life, it remained slightly discolored, a permanent reminder. On cold mornings, she would touch that scarred ear and remember the price of innovation, the cost of survival, the warmth of vindication. Sometimes the impossible is just the necessary that no one has attempted yet.